Okay, we have sound and we have recording. All right, I'm going to come here and join you. Again, this is the book that we're using, the supplementary book called Great Commission. And it really is more of a synopsis of movements and tendencies throughout missions history, whereas our regular textbook deals with individual missionaries. So it's a nice combination. And so today we are talking about missions in what part of the world?
Latin America.
Latin America. Okay, thank you. All right. So let's hear from you. What were some observations from today's reading that you found interesting?
On the second page, it said most of the history of the evangelical church in Latin America has been lost because no one has written it down. They talked a lot about how there were a lot of missionaries and they started churches, but it was just not written down, and like there are no records of it, so we don't really know how much they did, but they did a lot. So I think that was interesting because I think we hear a lot about like Europe and then America, but they actually did it too, just no one knows about it.
Yeah. And Miriam, if I had to boil the whole chapter down to one thing that struck me most, that would be it, because 2 or 3 times the author mentions that. Yeah. They weren't as fussy about record keeping in Latin America as, people in North America were, for example, or Europe. It just wasn't a thing. Right. In fact, do you remember from our introduction to this section what the attitude of many evangelicals was towards sending missionaries to Latin America? We mentioned that last class briefly. Especially liberals. If you're more of a liberal persuasion, what's your attitude toward people like fundamentalists, going to Latin America?
So they're like, they're already Christianized because they are all Catholic.
Right. Why are we trying to re-Christianize an already Christianized part of the world? Mm-hmm. If you're liberal and you view Roman Catholicism and everybody else is already saved, then that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was this is not in the book, but back in the 80s, an article came out about evangelicals and Christians together. In fact, it became a meeting. And J.I. Packer, whom I greatly appreciate as an author, unfortunately kind of jumped into this group, trying to bring evangelicals and Catholics together and show the commonality and diminishing, the differences between them. Almost as if to say, why are we pouring so much money into missions in Latin America? Yeah, they're different, but they do follow Jesus. So, let's put our money someplace else. Good, yeah. All right, yeah, so not much mentioned. There are lots and lots of stories that will never be told on this side of the earth. Now, let me just ask you this in light of what Miriam just said. What impact does that make on you? How does that strike you?
I think it's kind of sad because there's a lot of then nobody's going and preaching the true gospel.
No, I'm talking about the fact that their names aren't recorded.
Oh.
You have Miriam's comment that most of those who did early evangelistic work in Latin America are unknown. Records are not kept, so nobody knows who they are. Sorry about that. How does that strike you? Yeah.
Well, God knows who each of them is, and they'll have rewards in heaven, even if no one else knows about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, how many of us are ever going to have our names known by anybody outside of our immediate circles? Most of us are just not. And yet that's not what really matters. And Miriam, what strikes me about that comment is we have to serve God independently of recognition, applause, accolades, things that we might enjoy with parts of people. Yeah. Good, Caitlin. That was good. All right, what else from the reading?
One thing, I guess, kind of along the same lines, but it was interesting reading, it wasn't just that they didn't keep records, or maybe some did, but just never, personal journals or something. We don't know. But then it was also, they didn't want to emphasize their work either, because it talks about them not even, being sent out by a missions board, per se, and, doing some great work. It was more just they saw their work as missions just going out and serving their communities or like doing something mission minded but not like making a big deal of it. And so then even just their attitude was more, I don't know, they didn't really want to publicize it.
Mhm. Right. So their motivation, what drove them to do what they did? You know, they were driven by a commitment to Christ, not a commitment to attention or applause. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. What else?
I think it's on page 140. There's like a little statistic. It says it estimates in 2000 there are only 5% of churches in Latin America that had like missionary programs.
Mhm.
I don't know if that means like they're like actively sending people out or like to do global missions. I don't know, it's something that just like stuck out to me. Kind of what Laura was saying, a lot of it is just like in their area, like doing evangelism, not really sending anyone out to other nations.
Right, right. Yeah. If you look on 140, that last paragraph says, however, the fact that a church does not send missionaries does not mean evangelism is absent. What do you think of that statement?
We can still like share the gospel like around us, like to our neighbors.
Okay.
And if like if all of the churches would do that, and if there would be churches everywhere, then that would be the way how like the gospel would be shared. So
Okay.
I think that's like also important because either we are doing that in our own country or other countries have to send out missionaries
Mhm.
to that country. Like in Germany, we start starting to like send out people to start new churches like around us,
Mhm.
and we like those are not missionaries coming from America doing
Mhm.
that. So I think that's like that can be a way to do evangelism too. You
Okay.
don't have to send missionaries out to other countries necessarily.
Mm. Mm. Go ahead.
And kind of like along with that too, like missionaries did go out, the churches just didn't send them, and then said they had reasons, like they didn't have enough finances or their budget was too small or whatever their reasons were. So it says a lot of the missionaries, they went out and the churches like supported their work without supporting them. And they were like, I don't know, they made money somehow and survived somehow.
Mhm. Probably a lot of tent making. Who does this remind you of? Paul, okay, and later on in history, what other movement? People going out, tent makers, not formally commissioned as missionaries, perhaps. What movement actually popularized that right around the Reformation era?
Something like all the stuff that happened like the US, different types of missions, or no?
No, I'm thinking about a guy named, he was a count. Remember that guy? Who was the count? Yeah, I know. You go back farther than 3 or 4 weeks ago, man, we've had it, right? Zinzendorf. That ring a bell? What was the movement connected to him?
The missionary house or whatever. Something different.
They did that, but what was the name of this movement that he started?
Moravian?
Yes, the Moravians. Remember, they had this idea that everybody is a missionary. They didn't have the concept of a call to ministry per se, or church formally commissioning a missionary, right? And so, do you remember? I don't know. You probably wouldn't remember this, but in the Moravian movement, records indicate that does anybody happen to remember one out of what was the ratio of missionaries to members in churches in the Moravian circles?
So like 1 out of 5 or something?
Not that much. It was 1 out of 60. But still, I mean, think about it, even 1 out of 60 is an astounding number. Just think about your church or groups that you're familiar with. We're not even close to that. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that they emphasize missions to a degree that the ratio was very high of missionaries to church members. And this movement, Laurel, does kind of remind you a little bit of the Moravian mentality. I'm not saying that they're Moravian in their method, but it does remind us of that. It's good. All right, what else? These are good comments.
I do have a question. Going back to my first comment about how the missionaries just didn't like publicize it. Like on page 40, it says like these Latin American missionaries remain outside the databases. They were simple men and women who worked quietly, sacrificially, and boldly. And just like, I don't know what I quite think of that, because I feel like there's some aspect where you should be serving and doing missions for God's glory, and like not like doing it for your glory, you know, like making it publicized. But then there's also an aspect where you should be sharing what God is doing to encourage other people. Like, I don't know. What do you think of them being so quiet about it? Like, do you think that was a fine thing to do and it's just what happened? Or do you think that they should have been?
Well, okay, it's a little bit hard to analyze exactly what these words mean, quietly, sacrificially, boldly. I don't think that that necessarily means that they decided they weren't going to say anything. I think the idea is that they weren't interested in publicity. So I think there's a balance there. You're right. I mean, if we are really serving God because we love him and because we want to honor and bring glory to his name, then what we're doing will get out. We'll bleed that. We'll ooze that, right? And so, you know, that'll happen. So I think probably this statement is intended to emphasize the other extreme, which is people, you know, wanting to be known, wanting to be supported, wanting to, you know, have. I think that's where he's going with this. I don't think they were purposely saying we're not telling anybody anything. We're just going to.
No, I don't think that. But I was just wondering, like, if you thought missions should be publicized, or like, I do agree with, like, it's a good statement, but.
Yeah, it should. And another thing you have to keep in mind is that there are cultural and historical implications here. For instance, the ability to publicize in that context and the ability that we have to publicize missions today are just totally different, right? And the fact that we do have the means to do that, we should. I mean, what do we do every year at Missions Conference for a week? We publicize missions, right? What does every missionary and agency do when they come to display at our conference of publicizing? But they're not doing it to draw attention to themselves. They're doing it to encourage people to serve the Lord. So I think that a lot of it's cultural and historical, and they just didn't have the ways and means. They came from churches that were basically poor churches. And yet I think the idea of the author here is that didn't bother them. They just wanted to serve God. And whether they were able to publicize it or be well known or not. That's my take on it.
Sure, yeah, that's helpful.
Good. What else?
When it talked about when people were more so like sent by like an agency, but they were like very like controlling and like it was just, I don't know, not correct in how we would view that. Is that just because of the lack of funds that like churches had to send people, or how come things ended up going that way?
Yeah, a combination of reasons. What do you guys think, the rest of you? To what extent should an agency control what a missionary does?
I feel like maybe some boundaries are helpful, but not like really controlling, because they're not over there seeing what's actually going on.
Okay. Is there anybody that should be controlling what the missionary does besides God?
I think the sending church
Yeah.
is someone who's
Yeah.
like kind of like, I don't know, not necessarily controlling, but like that they know what's going on, like
Right.
that they can help them, and the agency can just be like support to that, like with finances. Or whatever.
Right. Kim, what was the word you just said?
Accountability.
Accountability. I mean, there has to be accountability. Missionaries are often accused and sometimes justifiably of being without accountability. You're out there and, you know, who knows where, you know, out of sight, out of mind. And so, you know, does anybody really know what the missionary is doing besides what the missionary decides to put into a letter, right? Or on an email or whatever. And so there has to be an accountability, okay? Let me ask you this, did Paul, the ultimate missionary, have any accountability?
Absolutely.
Where?
I mean, he wrote everything down.
Well, yeah.
Letters to everybody.
Yeah, even the fact that he wrote reports, shows accountability. Yeah, good. And what about a specific accountability destination for him? Was there anybody he specifically made himself accountable to? A person or a group?
Didn't Barnabas have some part in teaching? I don't know if that was accountability.
Yeah, I don't know if that wasn't so much accountability, it was just partnership. But okay, where did Paul routinely go at the end of each of his journeys? Except for the last one because he was imprisoned. His routine, who sent him out? Who sent Paul out?
Well, it'd be the church more broadly speaking, but I don't remember.
That's where I'm going with this. The church in Acts 13. Okay, I'm not going to ask who's had Acts class already. The church in Antioch, right? Sends Paul out in Acts 13. Okay, and when he comes back, where does he go at the end of that first journey? Antioch. And he spends some time, yeah.
Is that Persian Antioch or?
It's Syrian Antioch.
Yeah.
The other Antioch, yeah, there's several Antiochs actually in the
Yeah.
empire. The two that Acts mentions is Syrian Antioch, where he was commissioned, and then in Pisidian Antioch,
Oh,
which is
Pisidian,
modern day
yeah.
Turkey.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that the church where Christians were first called Christians?
Yes, exactly. And that's recorded in the founding of the church in Acts chapter 11. 2 chapters later is when he and Barnabas are sent out. So yeah, Ella, and we talk about this a lot. If you're going to work with a mission agency, does the agency have some right to demand accountability? Of course it does. It's not that all the accountability has to be invested in the local church, the sending church. But a good agency, what I would consider a biblical agency, being a parent church organization, will understand that the ultimate accountability belongs to the local church, the sending church, right? The agency demands accountability simply because they're working together. There's partnership with the missionary. But that accountability should always be subservient to the ultimate accountability of the church. And one of the marks of a good agency is that anytime there's an issue, with a missionary, the mission agency will default to the local church. And that doesn't mean that every time there's any little thing that happens, they're calling the pastor of the local church. But the agency recognizes that it is not there to mandate, but to come alongside and assist the church in the missionary's work. So yeah, a lot of those organizations were basically just thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
You
It's a
bet.
very interesting class.
Glad you enjoyed it. Have a nice to meet you, and good to see some fellow Buckeyes here. You're not a Buckeye, you can't leave. Wait, you are?
I am.
Wait a minute.
I lived in Ohio most of my
dear.
life.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, leave it to me to forget that.
And I'm in Michigan.
By the way, if you ever want some extra credit in one of my classes, I'd enjoy having one of those water bottles. You guys take care, enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, accountability, church, all right. Good. What else?
This is more of a question. It's on page 141.
Mhm.
Talks about like this program called the 1040 window.
Yeah.
You know what is that?
What is the
Never heard of it.
1040 window? It really became a huge deal around the 80s and 90s. I mean, really big. So what is the 1040 window?
It's like the area with the most people above. Not the gossip. Yeah. Like the underage. Right?
Can't get into.
I'm gonna, oh, wait a minute, what just happened there? I am gonna, yeah. I'm gonna bring up a picture of it, Matthew. Lots and lots of pictures, that's as good as any right there. Let's see. Okay. Oh, all right, well, I found a bigger, but you can see it. Okay, 1040 because of the parallels there, okay? The latitude and longitude lines. And 2/3 of the world's population basically lives there. And about 10% of all mission activity happens there. So missiologists will often talk about the imbalance in missions because we're going everywhere but where 90% of the, or 2/3 of the world's population live. And that's an interesting discussion because some missiologists, and we're getting a little off here, but that's okay. Some missiologists will say we need to missionary for equal. In fact, one famous missionary, I think I quoted this in, mentioned something about this in another class, said nobody deserves to hear the gospel twice till everybody's heard it once. Well, it sounds nice. Mathematically, it works really nicely, but I don't agree with that because Christ is the builder of his church. And for reasons known only to him, he has not chosen to spread everybody out evenly in the workforce around the world. He just hasn't. Now, do we have a responsibility to think about that and, to be intentional? Yes, we do. But to say that, that the church is failing if we're not spreading everybody out evenly, I just don't think that's correct. God has not chosen to do that. And but that's what the 1040 window is all about. So how many of you have been to the 1040 window somewhere in that window? You've visited that area of the world before? Anybody?
Is Israel on there?
Yes. Israel, right there. Largest two countries in the world are there, which are, in order?
China and India. China.
India is past China. Yeah, India is now considered officially to be the largest, most populous country in the world. China's second. Yeah, so that's what that. Where was that in the reading? What? I don't
It's
remember
like
that.
page 141.
I didn't remember reading about that.
It's like in the middle of like that first giant paragraph.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Right. So Latin America obviously is not in this window. Okay, and yet vastly populated area of the world. Okay. What else? You guys doing a good job. Comments. Can I draw your attention to 142 for a minute? First full paragraph. Third group of churches and organizations in Latin America have developed an indigenous Latin American theology of mission and evangelism. How's that for a mouthful? Latin American theology of missions and evangelism. I have a book in my library that's called Third Majority World Theologies. And majority world is another way of saying what? What's another way of saying majority world?
The 2/3.
2/3 world, right? We kind of avoid first, second, third world because those are more economic designations, okay? So this book is all about showing how different cultures in the majority world approach theology. We're not talking about different doctrinal positions, but emphases and the way that they articulate them. It's a very interesting book. And so that's what this is talking about. In Latin America, there are some Latin Americans quoted in here who are kind of complaining a little bit about the American imposition of theology on their culture. It's not that our theology is wrong, but our theology is articulated from a Western / in our most of us American viewpoint. I'm guessing that the theology in your church is probably very much that way as well. German and American articulation would not be that different anyway, because we're all Western world. But when you get out of the Western world, even if you both believe in the spirit world, for example, okay, if you're an African Christian, the way that you articulate that and explain that and the verses that you use to develop that may be very different from the way it looks to an American. So that's one of the things that some of these guys are complaining about. So this term here, Latin American theology of mission and evangelism, is not a change in theology, but a contextualization of the way it's expressed and explained to people. Does that make sense? And we use a simple illustration all the time. If you're teaching the story of David and Goliath to third graders, you're going to teach it one way. You teach the story of David and Goliath to seminary professors who have degrees in Hebrew. You're probably going to teach it a little differently. Same story, but your approach, your emphases, your explanation are going to be very different. That's contextualization. Yeah.
I think as an example, like in America, like trying to convince people that there is like a spiritual, world is like, for example, would probably be more difficult than in some places, like in some cultures, that's like pretty broadly accepted that there's like, because there's a lot of cultures that broadly meddle in a lot of like really dark spiritual stuff regularly. So the battle is not convincing them that there is a spiritual side because they know that,
Right.
but convincing them, how it actually works.
That's good. That's an important point because our Western world tends to dichotomize the natural scientific world from the spiritual world, religious world, and most of the 2/3 world does not do that. It's all one and the same. Yeah. And Latin America would be included in that. You think about Latin America, there's a lot of indigenous, groups in the Amazon basin and places like that. A lot of American influence in Northeast Brazil. I'm sorry, African influence in Northeast Brazil. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to point that out. Let me just read on this paragraph quickly. This group exists mainly within the context of, and he gives the name of a certain group that was formed. Next sentence, this group has considered critically and constructively the methods and theory of evangelism and missions that have come from North America and Europe. The main emphasis has been to develop a contextual evangelism that would be sensitive to the idiosyncrasies and culture of the particular situation in Latin America. So even something like evangelism, how do you do evangelism? What methods, what approaches do you use? Does the Romans road work in the 2/3 majority world or in Latin America? See, so a lot of the way we do things are built on assumptions that the way we understand things in our part of the world is the way everybody understands them, and they don't. So again, we're not talking about different doctrine. We're talking about the way you approach it, where people understand it. Okay, that's a really important thing. He makes, one guy kind of refers a little bit negatively to the North American world on page 143, that last paragraph, partway down, he refers to manifest destiny. Let me catch the, he says, the churches that directly or indirectly owe their origin to foreign missionary societies have received a body of attitudes, ethical stances, critical postures, economic ideas, and sectional loyalties that are more substantially related to the ideology of manifest destiny than to the gospel of Christ. This manifest destiny is a dynamic ideology, a mixture of both politics and theology, which North Americans carry with them wherever they go to evangelize, making them more the ambassadors of Anglo-Saxon Christianity and the American way of life than the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. This guy's, he's not real happy with, North. Yeah. And I would say this to you guys. What he says contains some validity, but remember that whoever you are, you're going to take yourself with you wherever you go. If these guys in Latin America send missionaries to Asia, for example, do you really think they're going to be able to strip themselves completely of their Latin American biases in order to minister the gospel in Asia? No. In other words, the same accusation they make of Americans coming down and implanting the gospel in their way of life and their thinking, they will do when they go to other places as well. The fact is, nobody in the world is able to completely avoid that. We are who we are. We take ourselves with us. So I think the important thing is not that we have to eliminate all of that, and become completely Latin American. The important thing is that we understand that tendency and try to deal with it. Okay? And so, I get his point, but I wonder if he's maybe being a little bit unfair in accusing all Americans of being imperialists, colonialists. That's just, I know that when I went, that wasn't my intention, but I had to take what I knew and the way I understood things to be, with a heart and a mind to learn. That makes sense. It's important to keep that in mind, because I don't want you to feel like if you go to another country, you can't take Germany with you. We can't take America with us. We're going to some degree. All right, any last comments if somebody wants to make from the reading? One more, we have time for one more comment maybe. Anything?
Do you feel like what he talked about in this chapter is pretty accurate based on your experience being in Latin America?
Yeah, I think he is. Most of these are Latin guys who are talking. Most of them would be broader evangelical than we are. The last section, he talks a lot about holistic. That clock's fast, by the way, just so you know. It's 20 minutes fast. No, I'm just kidding. He talks about holistic missions and the need to be thinking more than just the salvation of the soul, but also ministering to the whole person. He mentions when God saves us, he saves the whole person. So, and the whole person joins the church, and therefore, there is a place for holistic missions. And next semester in current issues of missiology, we spend quite a bit of time talking about that. So that's something that they feel a lot of Americans come down and they don't want to deal with anything materialistic or financial help people. They just want to preach the gospel of the salvation of the soul. So there's a lot of room for discussion. We'll hit that next semester. All right. Thank you, Nora and Elijah. Okay. Appreciate you guys coming and enjoy your day.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Praise the Lord. Now you get all your cards, for those of you who took the quiz, the credit.
So which majors have to take this class?
Well, anybody that's a missions major takes this course.
Missions major,
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But Matthew's not a missions major, he's taking it.
Okay.
Because it's an elective, he's doing it, right?
Okay.
So if there's room in the schedule for other stuff, sometimes students will opt in.
Okay. Yeah, because then obviously history major wouldn't fall on, or history teaching major wouldn't fall into that, but.
It would be cool for